All right, folks, welcome back to this ongoing fourth edition of our study of Yanuka. How many do you think it'll be, Zevi? Have you tried to guesstimate?
No, I haven't looked ahead, but we're about halfway through. I'd say I'm going to put my money on 8 sessions.
Really? I was thinking closer to 10, but yeah, 8. Yeah, I think it's gonna be something like that. And also, I think that one of the things that comes across to me, right, is like we're not going through the text like extremely fast or extremely slow. We could be certainly sitting a lot more on this, but it's amazing how little we're studying and how long it's taking. Like when I actually pick up the Daniel mat, and you take out the Yanuka, you're like, we're talking about a tiny section of the
Mm,
Zohar
mm.
just to get a sense of how long it would take to really chavrusa the whole. I mean, it would take years, I think, at
Yeah,
this point.
yeah. On this, it would be a lifetime on this pace. Yeah, it's really just a sliver that we're covering here.
It really is. It really is. All right. So also, I want to say this just to folks to know this. So I have a tiny emergency that I'm dealing with right now in my home. We have a furnace out, and having a furnace out in Michigan is a really bad thing because it's quite cold outside. And so at any minute, the furnace repair person is going to appear like an angel. And I'm gonna have to go hang out with them and get them working on the furnace. So I'm gonna have to dip out randomly in the next, in the next who knows. So you'll be with Zevi full time while I'm doing that, but hopefully it won't be more than like 10 minutes or something. So just as a warning, and ask for forgiveness for having to deal with stuff like that. But we got to stay warm before we can study Torah. So we got to stay warm. So just as a thing for that. Zevi, any reflections on last time before we
I,
open?
I love how the story came back to the Yanuka. We left the child for some time, and we've come back to his table,
Mm-hmm.
and we've come to eat from the table of the child. And things are getting spicy, and I've been really enjoying the banter between the guests and the child. And by now we know who the child is, and where we are like the guests who have returned for a second time as well. And we now beginning to have a relationship with him, and I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying the dance, the battle that they're engaging in, and yeah, that's for me.
Yeah, I think I also like. I feel the same way, and I also like um, the Yanuka is interesting, right? Because we talked about early on that his name, right, means like to suckle. Like comes from the shoresh, which means to nurse or to suckle. And it's fascinating that he's named that, and yet we're learning from him,
Hmm.
right? Like, we talked about this whole idea of like active and passive last time. The Shekhinah, how the
Mhm.
Shekhinah is passive in that she receives flow, but she's also active in that she's immanent in the world. And the Yanuka also is, I think, really interesting this way, right? Like he's clearly suckling from the divine, and because that's how he has all this Torah knowledge, but also we're suckling from him, right? We're like by studying the Yanuka, we become the Yanuka. And
Hmm.
so again, I like this idea that, and he's kind of infantilizing, right? He's like showing these older rabbis who's boss, and so he's reducing them uh, to children, and so we
Hmm.
also become children. There's something about that idea that um, by studying him, we become him, and I like
Yeah.
that. Like we become the Yanuka through that
Yeah.
process of study, and I really feel that happening, right? That we are also the sucklings. Um,
That's quite nice. I feel if I can add to that, I feel as well that like we saw this more in the first round when he was visited, but we see it here and we'll see more soon, where the Yanuka is related to another character in the story, which is his mother. And there's both the terrestrial mother, his actual biological mother, and then there's the great mother, the Shekhinah. And in some sense, there's a feminine aspect to it because, like in the Song of Songs, it's Yonik Shdei Imi, it's the one who suckles from the breast of the mother, and he certainly is suckling from the Shekhinah. And I feel like through the Yanuka, we come into a Yanuka relationship with the great mother as well. And I feel that too, that he brings the Shekhinah's presence, and so much of the discourse is about Shekhinah. Like Shekhinah,
right.
just the divine feminine, keeps showing up again and again, and there is that infant mother relationship, which is very dear and very sweet. There's few images in human imagery of the child suckling at the breast of the mother, which is as tender and as dear. And I feel that that's part of also what we're being invited into here, to suckle from the divine mother, from the Shekhinah. And if this imagery sounds strange to people, welcome to the Zohar.
Yeah, yeah. Like, sorry, not sorry. This is,
Yeah, exactly.
and that's absolutely the most mild it's going to get.
Yeah.
When it comes to intimacy in the Zohar. That's
If
like,
that's too much for you, you should leave now.
yeah, you would probably want to check out.
Yeah.
But yeah, we rejoin the Chevraya and the Yanuka at war. But an interesting kind of war, the battle of learning Torah, and so we kind of return to them in the midst of battle. So I guess I'll start because I may have to check out for a minute. So I'll patach.
Just leave me in a good section, Justin, so I can talk about something for a while.
I'll try. Yeah, this section is I didn't find to be, well, I guess the tendril stuff is like the vine stuff is pretty complicated, but let's go.
Go for it.
So Rabbi Eliezer said, although we should listen, here we should speak, drawing the bow. So I love the phraseology, right? Although we should listen, here we should speak. That there's a real tension in the, like, and I don't know your experience with Chavrusa. There's always a tendency in Chavrusa to want to talk over each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I love how the tension here is, although we should listen, we should speak. Like the listening and speaking dilemma, like when to listen, when to speak.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that. And of course he the imagery of drawing the bow captures that tension literally, right? Because drawing the bow is you're in potential engaging in combat, but you're not it's not active yet. And so literally the tension of we should listen here, we should speak is captured beautifully in the imagery of the bow.
That's quite nice. I was hoping to actually tap into why the different weapons are being used here, because I think there's 5 weapons you brought up, and I love that image of that you've created that kinetic energy, and you're waiting for the right moment to just literally let go and let it fly, and the tension is building as they're waiting and as they're listening, and that's a beautiful image, and I very much appreciate that.
Yeah, it's great, and of course the child immediately, the Yanuka comes back, and says, "Here is a shield against the arrow." Right, it's like I'm not scared. I have the shield against the arrow, so he's not terribly intimidated. But of course, the tension is broken. Rabbi Eliezer speaks, right? So he's loosed the arrow, but the Yanuka says, "Come at me, bro. I got you." So Rabbi Eliezer speaks, and we're back in this discussion of this relationship between chita and chata, right? Of the wordplay between wheat and sin. So surely we should call her chita, wheat, right? Wheat. But we see among the tribes, the 12 tribes of Israel, that the letters chet and tet never occur, right? And that's important because that's the word for sin, chet, right? They don't occur, yet in her they do. Right? They do occur in her, and we call her chita. So that's
her being, of course, Shekhinah.
Shekhinah, right? And so this is perplexing, right? So if the Shekhinah is supposed to be the manifestation of God, and not even none of the tribes of Israel have a chet and a tet in their name, why does Shekhinah, who is the divine manifestation in the world, why is she close to sin in this way? That's the puzzle they want to work out. And the Yanuka replies.
Can I just add something here, Justin, which is that this is the fact that these letters show up here or don't show up in other places is very significant for the Kabbalists, who are very punctilious when it comes to letters. For those in works of Jewish literature, specifically amongst the Kabbalists, when you letter a book, right? If you have the numbers in Hebrew are the letters as well, we won't spell out the numbers of a page if that same word combination will spell out a bad word, and we'll flip.
You're back. Zevi?
Did I drop out?
No, you're here. I can see you. I'm hearing you.
Okay. So we'll flip those letters to not spell the bad word, or we'll substitute it in another way. So it's not just oh, who cares if those same two letters are there? Like, those bad letters being there is a big deal for the Kabbalists.
Right. That's absolutely true. And also, I noticed some folks wondering where we are. We're in Balak, volume 3, 188 bet. A little after that, actually, but that's where we are. I know someone's trying to follow along, so we've actually covered 2 dapim, amazing, since we started. So that's where we are, just for folks catching it. But yeah, I mean, yeah. So words like, again, for Kabbalists, right, the relationship of language and metaphysics is very tight. We are not Caesurians in the Kabbalah world, where the language between sign and signifier is arbitrary. That is not a thing for Kabbalists. The relationship between sign and signifier is metaphysically prioritized, not just present, but prioritized. So absolutely.
Yeah, I think we failed to stress this when we were speaking in the last section, and looking over it, I realized that we perhaps could have made more of a point of it, which is we did this whole earlier wordplay on Tnufa, which is the waved offering, and we read it as Tnupa, give mouth, and it's really important to make this point that, like, as Justin is saying, that for the Kabbalists, language is essential. Language is how the divine creates the world in every moment, and it's the language of creation, which is the building blocks of the divine energy in each item. So when they want to understand something, it's not just an etymological analysis to get some sort of linguistic background. It's a metaphysical. Language is a metaphysical analysis, and we're going to see that come up again and again here with the letters, and that's very important to have in mind. And there's something quite beautiful about that, I think.
Absolutely, and again, when they sort of do this, what we call wordplay, it's anything other than play. Like they're mining, right? They're miners going into the metaphysical substructure of reality through language.
Yeah.
And so they're word mining rather than word playing, or they're playing in the sense that Freud would say, right? It's playing in the most serious way possible.
Correct. Yeah.
So yeah, we should. Yeah, you're right to note that we should never underplay that. All right. So the Yanuka replied, certainly so. For Chet and Tet dwell close to her, right? So sin dwells close to her. Among the tribes, these letters do not appear, since they are from the side of holiness, but by her they dwell. And this is really a really important thing, is that the Shekhinah is very close to Sitra Achra, because she's imminent to the world, and the world is dominated by Sitra Achra. We live in a broken world, right? And insofar as we can live in this broken world, the Shekhinah always has to dwell very close to Sitra Achra, because we always dwell very close to. It's just right next to us, right? It's just, again, you think about the other side. Don't think of the other side as like it's far away. It's the other side of a coin. It's razor thin edge between our world and Sitra Achra, and therefore, because and it also, because of Shekhinah's holiness, the more you increase in holiness, the more that Sitra Achra is closer to you. Therefore, the side of Sitra Achra, whose inverse is the demon Lilith, right? They're, to quote the Quran, they're as close as your jugular vein is to you. So that's why, right? Yes, in Israel there is no Sitra Achra, but for Shekhinah it's always a razor thin edge.
There's also the sense that that the way that Sitra Achra stay in existence, according to the Kabbalists, is what they call Yanika Sachitzonim, coming back to this word Yanuka. That they wean, or they suckle, but from the outside, because they're not directly supported by the Divine Father, by Kuchabricho. They have to kind of like steal the crumbs off the table, in a sense. And for that reason, they hang around Shekhinah, who's at the bottom of the metaphysical rung, so that they can get the drops of overflow in their own what's known as bechinas acharaim, in this backhanded way, as opposed to the side of holiness, which receives the panim, which receives from the face. So we have this dichotomy of the tribes who are on the side of holiness, who have a direct link with Kuchabrichu, and they're just there. And then there's the shady underworld, and the closest thing that they can come to is Shekhinah, and they're kind of there, always waiting to see what drops away that they can take from Shekhinah to stay in existence.
And also, and I have to go because I can hear the furnace person. But also, not only does the Shekhinah steal from holiness, but also we have to give it its due.
The Sitra Achra.
Yeah, Sitra Achra, right? Like, I think that's also a part of it, right? Is that it both gets the crumbs, but also sometimes we have to give the devil its due.
Right.
Her due in this case. So, all right, folks, I'll be back as soon as I can. Zevi, talk amongst yourselves.
Woohoo. Okay, we're left here. So I don't think we're going to continue. We won't go forward without Justin, but we can talk more about what's happening here in this past section with the Sitra Achra and the Shekhinah. Although we could do anything now that Justin's out. We could talk about how great of a friend and scholar Justin is, and how delightful it is to be here with him on a regular, and take away from our hectic weeks and be able to tap into some really old discussions that get down to some very basic psychological and metaphysical issues. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to pop into the. I actually can't see the chat from here. I'm going to pop into the chat and see what's happening here. If there are any questions or interactions, let's do that. Where is the chat? Huh. I do not see the chat. Interesting. Maybe I could see it from here. Give me 1 second. I'm going to get my phone. Hold up. We definitely won't talk Zohar without Justin being here. That would be that would be remiss. Let's pop this open. I want to hear how everyone's doing, how the study's been for them, what's been happening, what's been exciting, what's been challenging. Okay. So we got people here. Someone in the chat said, what is Shekhinah? I thought we should explain that. Shekhinah is the divine feminine. Shekhinah comes from the Hebrew shochen, to dwell. It's that of the divine which indwells, v'shachanti b'tocham, that dwells amongst us, amongst the humans. And it's that of the divine, and it's also associated with the divine feminine is the dwelling. And I think we explained last week why the feminine is associated with the indwelling. Jacob Waller, take everything that's not, pulled it down. Yes, Justin is going. Talk about how lucky we are to have someone of his caliber sharing knowledge with us. We are very lucky, and I'm very lucky to have Justin as a friend to share knowledge with me. And however lucky you guys are, I'm luckier. Thanks. Great to hear the deeper levels from Scott. Thank you for being here with us, Scott. Question from Alexander. Good, we have questions. These will keep us busy. Is there any connection between alchemical thought and Kabbalah? Yes, Justin is going to be a lot more qualified to answer to that. But there are, yes, Western alchemy is tied into the matrix of Western esotericism. Justin's expertise and Western esotericism is very deeply steeped in Kabbalah from the Renaissance onwards. So, yes. Dylan asks, what is your favorite? I didn't tell Justin that we we're going to turn this into a live Q&A. I hope he doesn't mind. What is your favorite Yanuka shade so far? Favorite Yanuka shade? That's a good question. I think one of the spicier shades was when they had this whole back and forth about who would lead the blessing, the grace after meals, the benching, and his guest said we should bless because the Talmud says that the host breaks the bread, and it's the guests who bless. It's the guests who have a chance to bless back and thank the host. And the Yanuka slaps back and says, I'm not your host and you're not my guests. It's like you're not even my guests, which I thought was quite spicy. Next question. Fight the Evil Robot says Shekhinah is the female aspect of God in Kabbalah. must be united with the masculine aspect of God for the world to be repaired. That's correct. The job of the Kabbalists is to unite the masculine divine and the feminine divine in a sacred union, a heros gamos, known as Yichud Kuchabrich Ushchinte. And that is what every single act of religious ritual and an act of kindness is an attempt for the Kabbalists to achieve. Many practicing Jews that are influenced by the world of Kabbalah will either before every single mitzvah, every single ritual commandment, or once a day will say L'shem yichud kochabrichu shchinte liachadashim yudke b'vavke b'chudashlim b'shem klei Yisrael, that hereby in this action I try to invoke the unification of kochabrichu and shchina, etc., etc. Is it like the Holy Spirit? There have been some comparisons made between the Holy Spirit and Shekhinah, and they do function in similar ways. Judaism has its own concept called Ruach HaKodesh, which is literally the Holy Spirit, and sometimes that's overlap with Shekhinah. It's more of like a personalized Shekhinah in some sense. Adam Afterman, a great scholar and friend of mine here in Jerusalem, has argued that Ruach HaKodesh is really more of a Jewish language of incarnation, that we take the divine spirit within us, and that's how it's being read there. What else do we have here? Ale Cat says thank you for being here with us. Beep Boop said, am I correct in detecting a cheeky tone in the Zohar? Yeah, absolutely. The Zohar is a very cheeky text, and it is very playful, and it's here to have fun, and play is a very, very big part of it. And it's, as we said before, it's a very serious play, and that's definitely true. And there's a cheekiness. We spoke before how the Yanuka itself. One second, let me just close this door. We said before how the Yanuka, in some sense, the child, this wonder child, is a personification of the Zohar itself, of the young sages, the young scholars of the Zohar who are coming to really challenge the status quo. They're coming to challenge the same way that the Yanuka challenges the older guests that visit him. They're challenging the sages of the generation, and in that there's certainly something cheeky which they're partaking in. Okay. My father, God bless his soul, was a Kabbalist and would love to have one of you see his library. He also collected all books from the bazaars of Istanbul. Would have loved. Justin is an avid book collector. I'm sure Justin would have been very, and myself as well. I'm not a book collector as such, but I'm a lover of books, and I would have loved to have seen it. Okay. Scott says, thank you for these sessions. What is it we do? How do we perform this new understanding? ? Daily life! ! That's a very great question. That's a really great question. How do we bring these things into our daily life? It's hard to say, because there isn't one central message that we're trying to come to here. It's a journey. It's an exploration, and I think what the Zohar does is it invites us into that journey, invites us into that saga with it, and what it's telling us is that we can create our own framework of reality. We can choose what narrative we want to be in, and there's the potential to choose the hero's journey of the Zohar in some sense. And what that means to see every moment as an opportunity to learn, as an opportunity to grow closer to God, whatever that word means to us, to grow deeper in understanding and wisdom and compassion and humility. And I think part of the big thing that we're seeing here, and then we see throughout the Zohar, is on this journey we encounter people, and we all encounter people, right? And we can either encounter people and then dismiss them as strangers and weirdos and who knows what, or we can see them as great fonts of wisdom and experience, and that's something that the Zohar does. It will meet a donkey driver along the street, and it turns out the donkey driver is really has this tremendous fountain of wisdom to share with us. Or we meet a young child here, the Yanuka, right? That's what we're studying now. And the child who would have just been dismissed is now this great source of inspiration and wisdom and kindness. And in that sense, I think the journey of the Zohar invites us to participate in that and to see the people that we encounter in our life as part of that great journey. And now we have Justin back with us. So
sorry folks.
We did a bit of a Q&A here until you were back.
It's a great use of time. Unfortunately, this furnace situation is looking complicated, so may have to dip out again. But we'll get to what we get to. All right. I guess I'll continue.
Sure.
So if you say no, then draw the sword and say, why does that daughter hold these letters? Why does Shekhinah hold these letters? Well, if you knew the sin of Adam, and we get to some curious stuff here, which they said was chita, right? Then you would know all. When the tree is victorious, the good side seizes the other side, overwhelming it. I guess we should continue because maybe the next part kind of explains it. So the ancient companions, right? So not the Chavraya of the day of the Zohar, but the really old companions explain this word situating it afar, simply chita, just wheat, right? But the later ones came along and said, no, chita, like, but really, like, no, chita, like, seriously. And then Isaiah came along and explained it as it's written, you'll be far from oppression, chita, and from ruin, and surely it will not come for you, right? So Isaiah comes along a little bit later and explains it even better. Therefore, a dot in the middle, the dagesh, the point in the middle of the tet, so that it will not be chata'ah, it won't be sin. For without the dot, it would be chata'ah. The substitution, and this is where they do a funny wordplay between tet and tav, which is funny because we can tell that he's thinking in Sephardic pronunciation. But between tet and tav, right, that teveru, which is closely assigned with it, destruction for the other side, elucidation of that word. So again, more word plays, more important word mining being done here. I think what jumps out to me, that's aside from the word plays that are really interesting here, is that we get the Zohar's interpretation of what the fruit was in the Garden of Eden. That it wasn't a fruit in the sense of certainly not an apple, right? But it was wheat. That what they ate is what the forbidden fruit was here was chita, was wheat, and that's a great wordplay, right? That from chita comes chata'a, which is a fantastic wordplay. All right, I'm getting another call. Sorry, folks.
So maybe I'll try and explain what's happening here a little while Justin is on the phone. There's, as Justin is saying, that we think of the sin in the Garden of Eden typically as an apple tree. That's how it's depicted in a lot of art and iconography. But in classic Jewish sources, that's actually not the case. And one of the options, as we're saying, is that it's a stalk of wheat, actually, which is not a tree at all, and we don't think about it as a fruit. So it's interesting. But what we're saying here is, maybe Justin's back with us. Why does the daughter hold these letters? So why does the daughter hold these letters, Justin?
I mean, because I think that, and again, my apologies for this whole furnace situation. Apparently, getting heat back in that furnace is going to be $850. So, donate to Esoterica. I think that that the Shekhinah has to have chet for, I think, at least two reasons jump to my mind most immediately. The first reason that jumps to mind is because she's with us. Like she's Malchut. She's the closest part of the divine to the human world, and therefore, insofar as that Shekhinah has to be imminent to us, she has to be imminent to us, and that means having to deal with chet, with chata'ah, with sin. So I think that the first thing is that immanence implies that. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind. The other reason why I think that Shekhinah has to have sin is that it's part of the redemption arc of Israel, right? That we have sin, and we have to have it redeemed, and that's part of all that. Whatever's happening down here has to be mirrored in the divine,
Correct.
and therefore the Shekhinah has to have chata'at too, has to have chet, and because that's part of the redemption arc.
Correct.
So it seems to me that the logic of, and this also has to do with the nature of evil in the Zohar. Like, this is not Neoplatonism, right? As much as we love to think of the Zohar as Neoplatonism, in Neoplatonism, sin is a privation, not in the Zohar. In the Zohar, sin is like evil is real. It's a metaphysically real thing from Gravura, and insofar as it's real, it also is part of the drama of the divine body, and of course, the part of us, again, part of the divine closest to us has to have this.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting because chet is also chisaron. It's also lack. It is also absence at time for the Kabbalists, and it certainly works well with the Shekhinah motif, who the Shekhinah, which is also associated with Malchut, the last of the Sfirot, which is classically described as by the Kabbalists as that which is let la legarma klum, that which has nothing of its own, like the moon which reflects back the light of the sun, and it's that lacking, it's that absence, and that certainly is part of what you're saying, is this cosmic arc, that this thing which is empty on its own, and here in that sense, chet doesn't mean evil per se, but it means absence of goodness, which has to be then filled, and that's part of the journey. I really like this expression. Also, just to say, Justin, if you need to dip out to deal with your heat, feel free to. We'll just continue with the Q&A.
Luckily, they have to go get a part and come back. So I think we'll have even the broken blower motor will get redeemed.
Right. It has chisaron. It has a lack that it needs fixing. But I love this expression that if you knew the sin of Adam, you would know all. Which is both contextual, but it's also much broader and grandiose. It's contextual in that the question that you're asking about the letters of chet and tet, of sin, you would be answered. But it's not just that; it's you would know all, like somehow, like all of existence would be explained if you just understood the secret of the sin in Adam, which is true for the Kabbalists and quite beautiful, because that sin, that archetypal moment, explains the whole cosmic story. And it seems to be that there's a double language there of knowing all, not just knowing the answer to the specific question here, but really all of existence would unravel for you if you knew the real secret of Adam.
Right. And I think that this is another interesting thing about how Kabbalah is very different than other kinds of versions of reading the Genesis story, is that the primal purity of Adam, and this is maybe a more Hegelian reading, was still an incomplete purity, that there had to be a kind of fall to achieve a greater redemption. And it wasn't like Adam sinned to get redeemed in some kind of Shabbatian sense like that, God forbid, but that there's a dialectic happening here, and that the primal childlike purity of Adam was insufficient for what had to come, and therefore, and ditto, we'll see this in a minute with the Bnei Yisrael, right? That they re-achieved that primal purity, but there had to be the sin of the golden calf to push things forward again. Yeah. So I think that the idea there is that so I think that's an interesting thing. But I love you're right, the idea that you would know all, which is ironic considering, right? But that's the one tree they didn't get to eat from. Right.
Yeah, like, the tree of knowledge, right? Of knowing all.
That's a funny kind of pun, right? Or a funny kind of unit of analysis, because Adam didn't know all precisely because God shoot him out of the garden, right? But we would if we knew the sin, which is interesting. Right. We eat of the sin and learn. We learn all that stuff.
Yeah.
So, you want to more, or you want to go forward?
Did we explain this? Do you feel like we explained this the next paragraph as well? Or the tree is victorious, the good side seizes, the whole other side overwhelming it.
Yeah,
Also, the two companions, the earlier companions situating it afar,
right.
The latter ones, when they say chita really, when they say chita really, they mean chita really shchina.
Right. And so it's funny that the temporality there is really weird, right? Because
Yeah.
it's the ancient companions first, then the Chavraya of the Zohar,
Yeah.
and then Isaiah,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And I think that
Yeah.
there's something interesting about them putting themselves
Before Isaiah.
before Isaiah, before the prophet, right?
Yeah.
That again, the chutzpahdik of the Zohar never runs dry.
Yeah. And another funny thing is that if you switch the letters and you follow their instructions, you don't spell the word which they tell you it spells.
No, no, you don't.
You spell the meaning of the word.
Right. Yeah, it is a strange. It's a stretch to say the very, and I wonder what the word elucidation there is in Aramaic. I'll look it up in a second when we're reading. But yeah, it's not at all. The amount they're elucidating there is it's a real stretch. When this tree is victorious, they must be referring to the tree of good and evil, right? Or is it the tree of knowledge?
Which is an interesting thing. The good side seizes, the hollow side overwhelming it.
This the tree of chita. Oh, they're meaning that they're referring to the tree as chita, which is
shchina. Right.
That has to be what's happening there.
Right. Yeah.
We should again. This is Zohar, right? For the Zohar, the fruit is the fruit of the forbidden fruit here is wheat, but folks may know this as like an apple, right? That there's a pun in Latin, malus malum. The word for apple and evil in Latin are almost the same word. That's part of the reason why we imagine apples. I think it's because of John Milton, actually. But here in the Zohar, right? In some literature, it's pomegranates, but here it's wheat. I like that derivation much better, because also there's something about the linking of it to agriculture, and I always think about the moment of agriculture as being a very double-edged sword, right? That we lost something really important when we ceased to be hunter-gatherers. We gained a lot, but I think that moment of that moment where we in ancient Turkey or ancient Sumeria, and I think the earlier versions of wheat were like emmer, when we really like seized wheat. I think that moment is a very powerful moment in human history. So it's interesting that we think about that as the huge before and after moment in the Torah. I think also it's a huge before and after moment in human history as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting read to see the original sin, to use a Christian phrase, as the shift to an agrarian society, which also ties in quite nicely to that whole battle being played out between Cain and Abel, and where between the two types of sacrifices which they're bringing, and the struggle between them as a broader representation of a struggle between hunter-gatherer, agrarian, and that's an interesting one as well, right? One of them is a hunter-gatherer who's bringing flesh to God. The other one, the animal, and the other one is bringing wheat to God in some sense. So you do see that narrative, and that's a reading that's been done quite beautifully a few times.
Yeah. And again, the more of the wheat stuff comes to mind, like the idea of chita being really important is like you'll earn your bread by the sweat of your brow. It makes the story very interesting in that the punishment is related to the thing. Right. That your punishment, you're punished. And this is also a thing that I think that many readings of Eden get lost, is that my sister-in-law had a baby yesterday that the Torah says that your birth pangs will increase, which means they must have always been there. Right. Which is again a fascinating glimpse of what paradise was. It was never going to be easy to make more people. Right. And we'll get into this issue of reproduction here in just a minute. But I think the idea of chita being the original sin, or the fruit that was eaten, is great, because that becomes the object of the curse as well.
Yeah, that's nice. It's also interesting that we introduce this dot in the middle to differentiate between the two words. And on the surface glance, it looks like, we just have any kind of visual or grammatic linguistic separation. Therefore, we can read them differently. But there is also the way that the Kabbalists read letters. There's a lot of significance in the actual pictography and topography of the letters themselves, which we have, God willing, soon coming up on over at my channel, going through the letters. But it's a sense where the smallest letter, the yud, is seen as a very precious letter. It represents divinity for the Kabbalists. It represents humility, and there's also a sense where within the Torah text itself, there are sometimes letters appear large and small, a rare occurrence. And this dot, this dagesh, is like the smallest indentation possible, and which harkens for the Kabbalists, no doubt, to their idea of the nekuda, the point. One of the early Kabbalistic cosmologies begins with, in a Pythagorean sense almost, of the point, the line, and then the field. Nekuda kav shetach. And so this nekuda, this point in the letter, evokes all of that for the Kabbalistic mind, which is the point of divinity, the infinitesimal, the humble, and so it's not. I think there's something specific about us holding on to this point.
No, you're absolutely right. And again, if folks have never actually seen a Torah scroll, one of the neat things about them, I always have the joy of, my wife's a rabbi, so I get there early with her, and she has to do all the setup and stuff. So my job usually is rolling the Torah. And as a person who does calligraphy, I love to scroll through it because there's all kinds of interesting things like the inverted nuns and letters that are big or small, or dots above letters in certain kinds of places. So yeah, it absolutely is the case that these tiny things, and again, it harkens back to even to Jesus, right? Not a jot or a tittle will go away of the law, right? We're seeing how important the jots and the tittles are.
Yeah, and then it's quite nice the way this paragraph ends here. Elucidation of the word, and Matt puts here an exclamation mark. And that's a sense here, which we were talking about earlier, that elucidating the word is not a trivial act. It's something which deserves an exclamation point. Like, when you elucidate the word, you've elucidated the reality of the thing itself. And here we're crunching down on this word chita, and we're drawing out its associations, and we're drawing out its relationships. And the more we do that, and the more we elucidate, the more that we're able to enter into what that word really means. And that's through the letters, and not just the letters, through the dots and through the location, through all of that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Again, nothing is, in fact, not only is nothing too small for the Zohar, but the smallest things are the most, in many ways, often the most important.
Well said. Important lesson for life as well.
Yeah, I think that's an important lesson for. Yes, I agree. Zevi, you want to pick up?
Sure. You companions who did not serve Rabbi Shmaya the Pious say that the other side has no share in the 7 species of grain. Not so, for the other side has a share in everything that rots in the ground. What share does he have? The chaff driven by the wind, as it is written, not so the wicked, but like chaff that the wind has driven away. Lekein harasha kiem kemoitz asher yitchena ruach. And similarly, for the wind passes by and it is no more, and its place no longer knows it. Also there in the book of Psalms. For the Holy Spirit scatters it in every direction, so that it is nowhere to be found. So the Yanuka has another swipe at the companions, saying, certainly you didn't serve Shemaiah the Pious, the great sage. This point of there's the 7 grains. The 7 grains is the 5 grains of the rabbinic canon, which is wheat, barley, oats, spelt, and rye, and added to the 7 is rice and millet. Matt elucidates for us here in his comments. And he say that according to Shemaiah the Pious, the other side has no share in these 7 species, but not so. Everything that rots in the ground, everything basically that disintegrates, that doesn't have integrity to go on for eternity, returns to the abyss of the Sitra Achra in some sense. And then he draws this comparison between the wicked and the chaff, because the wicked in the book of Psalms are compared to the chaff which is blown away, showing that they're insubstantial. Again, this theme of disintegration, that they'll be annihilated, which is the theme that returns to the wicked. Like the wind passes, no longer they have no substance. And once we can create this parallel between the chaff and the wicked, we can now begin to open up again another side of this chita, chata'a side of thing, part of the chita, the wheat, which is associated with sinfulness, specifically the chaff. Now we've drawn attention to.
Right. I guess the only thing I would add to that is that the idea that the Sitra Achra has a share in everything that rots in the ground, that would include us.
Hmm.
You know, like
or at least the part of us which rots in the ground, right?
Yeah, the part of us that rots in the ground.
Right.
And so I think that again, like the that's an interesting. Again, it's just like to think what all rots in the ground, and that Sitra Achra has a share in that, which of course must include our body.
Right.
So that's a fascinating. Again, like giving the devil its due kind of idea.
Yeah. This refers to the female. What is the male? Straw. Chaff and straw go together, so they are exempt from tithing since they have no share in holiness. Maybe we'll just continue a little more, and then we'll open up. Hey, the letter hey, the fifth letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Clean grain without straw or chaff. Chet and tet is male and female. Chaff and straw, as we just said. Hey, clean grain. So fullness of the tree is chita, ches, tes, hey. Wheat, and the tree by which Adam chata'a sinned was chita. For all is in the mystery of chita. And I think that section doesn't need any explaining. So ches and tes. So we've said that there's two, that the straw is made up of two components. There's chaff, and there's chaff. So wheat is made up of two components: chaff and straw. The feminine and the masculine, the female and the male, as it's putting here, which are then represented by the two letters ches and tes. Sin being made up of the combination of man and woman, ches and tes, which is interesting. There's some discussion of the original sin as an act of intimacy between the first man and woman, Adam and Eve, and we typically think about that as not a Jewish interpretation, but here we see the Zohar seems to be saying that's the ches and tes, the man and woman together, which is the two letters of first two letters of chet, and then chita, the final letter is the hey, is the purity. Hey, also we said earlier is malchut, because it's the fifth letter of the tetragrammaton. And it's interesting when what we're saying here essentially is, as far as I understand it, and Justin, I'd love to hear as well what you think, is that when we have the sin of man and woman together and the hey of Shechina combined with them, then we have the full chita, which is the full Shechina. And Shechina is only the combination of the purity and the impurity. And the two of them together, this is, if we knew the sin of Adam, we would know all. This is what we're tapping towards. This is the mystery of chita. The mystery of chita means, as far as I can see from here, it is the commingling of sin and purity together, creating this new level of divine sanctity. The Shechina, the great, the chita, really, as chita mamash, as we said earlier.
Right. And I think that's really, really important, right? That it takes the chata'a to be chita, right? Like it's part of a process. It's not sort of like that sin is part of that process, for whether we like it or not. It's just part of the process of redemption. It's also interesting that this is a place where the Zohar, will revel in its share of misogyny, but this is an interesting place where it doesn't do that. Like you would think that it would associate maleness with the wheat and femaleness with the chaff. Like that's it's constant. That's the typical kind of medieval misogyny that you see, but it doesn't do that. Like the male was associated with the chaff. Like
the male with the straw and the female with the chaff. No.
Right. Like it's like but it's still like we're the disposable part. The men are the disposable part. Like they're it's just interesting what gets associated with what in a specific place.
They're not consistent in their misogyny, you're saying.
It's just an interesting, an interesting move that they make that they could have certainly done otherwise.
Matt,
and we come back to full circle to this whole idea of wheat and sin being connected, which I find to be
right, and the need for sin in some sense. Matt makes a nice elucidation here that the two sides, the chaff and the straw, are referred to the two demonic, the female demonic Lilith and the male demonic Samael. That's a nice little point that he brings in here as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. We're getting some good Sitra Achra stuff, which is nice. People seem to like. I think Sitra Achra is a really fascinating topic, just because it's such a the Zohar's conception of evil is so novel, even in the history of Judaism. But I think in the history of Western philosophy in general, I think it has a very novel theory of evil, and so it's nice when we get it a little bit elucidated here in some of these texts.
The dark side.
Mm-hmm. But a dark side that's necessary, right? And again, in the more Hegelian sense, that it's when we talk about necessary evil, the Zohar really means necessary evil.
Yes. Yeah. And we see that very clearly here, that the word chita, which refers to the Shekhinah, can literally only be spelt with sin, right? You can't spell Shekhinah without sin, is what they're saying here, if we put it in English.
Yep.
Rabbi Eliezer was amazed, and the companions were amazed. Rabbi Eliezer said, "Certainly so." So here they take a step back from their dueling positions, and they're stunned by his profound insight, both perhaps into the letters and the text, but also into the nature of reality and the human psyche coming from such a young child. And they say, "Certainly so."
And notice also they don't use the war language at this point.
Correct.
Like they could have used a metaphor like, "Oh, I've been wounded," or the arrow hit, or whatever. That notice that they're so amazed that they drop the metaphor.
What's interesting is that they seem to be off their leg here a little, right? They're so stunned that they've lost the battle, but the child is in full form. The child says, "Certainly so" is the verse with which we began. Like, don't hold back your certainly so's, that we still have more to do here, right? And maybe I'll read this last one. I'll pass back to you. Mm-hmm. For Bali comes first into the world, and it is available for food, as food for grazing animals. A point we mentioned earlier, as Bali, the first that comes into the world, the first thing to sprout during the season, and is available for food. It's not exactly used for humans; it's more for animals. But here we say not just any animal, but animal specified. Animal unspecified. Right. And we know when something is unspecified, it means the supernal, the spherotic, the divine. So what is this unspecified? What is the divine animal? This is the mystery of 1,000 mountains growing every day, and she eats them. It is called bread of Truma, coming back to the Truma sacrifice, from Leviticus, which we began to speak about earlier during the battle in the previous live stream. Food of that Truma is what is offered at night, for it is written, when the sun sets, he becomes pure. Pardon me. And afterwards he may eat of the holy, for it is his bread. Leviticus 22:7. Of the holy means Truma. Of the holy, not the of the holy, not the holy. For what is holy without further qualifications is not called Truma, since we have learnt greater stringency applies to the holy than to Truma. So, just to try and unpack this a little, and Justin may help me here, that the unspecified animal, again, is Shekhinah. Everything seems to be referencing Shekhinah, who is the great beast, which is eating the 1,000 mountains that grow every day, which is a great imagery. The bread of Truma, which is offered at nighttime. Nighttime is associated with Shekhinah, as we said earlier. Shekhinah is associated with the moon, nighttime. When the sun sets, daytime associated with Kodesh Bricha, with the divine masculine. When the sun sets, when the divine masculine sets, and the priest becomes holy, then it is his bread. Then the bread is offered to Shekhinah in some sense. And this last point of the holy, min hakodesh, and not the holy, is somehow a diminutive. It's somehow lesser than the holy, which is not called Truma, since we've learned that greater stringency applies to the holy than to Truma. So we've differentiated based on a Talmudic reading here between the holy and Truma, and which works with the previous reading that the Truma is the Tunufa which goes to Shekhinah, i.e. it is of the holy which goes to Shekhinah and not the holy which goes to Kodesh Bricha. Justin?
Yeah, I think that's a great reading. And I guess the only thing I would add is I love the imagery of Shekhinah as a beast. Like we typically get and I think there's maybe a conscious imagery here of like Leviathan is always almost associated with Sitra Achra, but the other big animal of the Bible, Behemoth, right, is maybe associated here maybe a little bit with Shekhinah, so the idea of like a beast in that way. But yeah, I think it's interesting that think about layers of holiness. We typically think of like 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 if something is ritually impure, right? We think of it like holiness is either an on or off switch. But
Mm.
it's interesting the idea that we here have like the truma is set aside for the kohanim, but the kohanim have to themselves achieve an even greater state of holiness. They have to undergo the mikveh and they have to wait till sundown. Only then can they eat it. So it's interesting about who is holier here. Is the kohen
Mm.
really holy because they've achieved a greater share of it, or is it the case that Truma is actually holier
Mm.
because the Kohen has to achieve a greater state of holiness to
Right.
consume it?
Right. Yeah.
Here the Zohar has an opinion about that, right? That the Kohen is more pure than the Truma. But again, the idea here is it's really great to think about holiness as again separate, right? You can rise up layers of sanctity, and this is a case where we have that the ladder of sanctity actually laid out.
Right. And you have the same on the flip side, right? We've been talking about Sitra Achra, the other
Yeah.
side, and the other side perfectly mirrors, right? In the same way that there's layers of sanctity, there's also layers of impurity. And that's well known in halacha, that there's different levels of tuma. And there's much discussion amongst the Kabbalists of the 49/50 gates or levels of impurity and of purity as well, which is a theme that pops up when Moses dies on Mount Nebo, Har Nevoy. The Kabbalists read it as Har Nun Boy, the mountain which has Nun 50, the 50 levels of holiness, that basically a reference. So, and this is certainly something which works well in their metaphysics of these great change of beings running up to the divine and down to the demonic, 50 in each direction.
Right, and then the idea of again, even and there are Kohanim today, I think, that in Israel that don't leave Eretz Israel because of on the and we'll get to this in a minute, on precisely those grounds that that even though the temple's not there, there's still a level of sanctity that one has by just being in Eretz Israel. So
right.
So I guess I'll pick up.
Go for it.
Speaking of which, the Holy Land. Which is funny because there actually is a development near Jerusalem called Holy Land, which is hilarious. I stayed there once and I was like, it's hilarious. It's named in English, Holy Land. So the Holy Land is under the authority of the Blessed Holy One, and no alien authority can enter there. How was the Holy Land tested to see if she remained faithful, not conjoining with an alien authority? By offering this truma of barley modeled on the mystery of the straying wife. So a couple of interesting things are going here. So you get the sense, right, that what's happening here again is that the mystery of the straying wife is a Sota ritual. Folks may know this ritual. This is where if a husband thought his wife had committed adultery, he could subject her to the Sota, where she would be brought in and made to drink a mixture of ashes and soil. And if her it's not really clear what happens to her, right? Her stomach turns upside down. Something bad happens to her. Then she was guilty of adultery, and then she would be put to death. But if nothing happened, that would assuage the jealousy of the husband.
Right. Numbers chapter 5.
Right. It's a famous image of the Sota. I love that Rambam says that it never worked, that no woman was ever convicted on this, and it basically was always meant by God to be just a venting mechanism for men. That it because he thought it was basically so close to magic that and so basically it was part of his theory of like weaning the Israelites off of paganism, off of like being in Egypt, and so that he gave them this thing to basically like to make men for a way for men to work out their feelings, but no woman would be convicted of it, and it never would work. I love the idea that
it's such a Rambam thing to say.
So Rambamish, like I love that. The Maimonides. I love that reading of the Sota, that it was always just basically a steam release valve for like for dudes who can't control their feelings. But I think the idea here is that for whatever reason the Yanuka is relating the Sota ritual with the Truma, and I think maybe the connection here is you bring your wife to the Mishkan and you bring the Truma to the Mishkan. Like, they both go to the Mishkan, like, because there's no grain involved in the Sota, is there? Maybe the ashes would be the grain, the remains of
Interesting.
of the korban, but or some of the korban, because you do burn some of it. Otherwise, it's a very strange connection to make. But I think the idea, right, is that, I mean, I think that the connection here is that the reason why they link the Holy Land with Truma is that it's very strange to give up your first fruits. Because imagine you're an agricultural society. The first thing that you would gather, you'd want to eat. That seems perfectly reasonable, right? Because you're an agricultural society. You eat, first out of the gate, you want to eat it. But it's precisely, and again, it's the land that did this, not the people, right? And that the land, rather than enjoying the first fruits, gave them to Hashem, and therefore that made the land worthy. I think that's what's happening here.
Oh, Matt also adds a point here, which is true. I was thinking about something like this. There's a minchas, what's it called? The minchas kanos, or minchas kinim, which is the grain offering of jealousy, which is a tenth of an ephah of barley, and that the husband brings before the Sota ritual takes place. So there is. I thought there was some sort of barley sacrifice, and there is.
Yeah. A tenth of an ephah is a lot. It's not nothing. And again, maybe that's it's like in legal situations, you have penalties for people bringing frivolous lawsuits.
Right.
And maybe it's the same way. Like, yeah, if you're going to bring your wife to this ridiculous ritual, you have to. Yeah, it's going to cost you even to test her. So it could be a whole ephah, I think. But yeah. But anyway, the Sota ritual. Folks may not know this. There's an entire tractate of the Talmud dedicated to the Sota. It's one of those one of my favorite ones to study.
It's that the image here is very interesting, I thought, because there's a sense where the jealous husband makes his wife drink the Sota waters, the Mei Sota, but there's a sense here that there's this relationship that Shechina and Kodesh are in, right? The divine masculine, the divine feminine, and what we're saying here basically is that God is the jealous husband, right? God is concerned that the Shechina, the divine indwelling feminine, is somehow being around with alien authority, which here seems to be the Sitra Achra, the other side, right? And we're going to see that that's going to be a theme that will pop up in a paragraph or two when we speak about this Adam and Eve, that there's also a concern there of someone else being involved, and we'll get to that in a second. Right. But the sense that the land itself is not faithful, and that's a strong theme that when the Jews come to the land of Israel, when they're after the desert, there's a refrain that's repeated often that do not be unfaithful unto the Lord, or else like the land will spit you out. And the Jews represent the collective Shechina in some sense, right? And the question is, what are they doing in the land? Are they being faithful to their spouse, the divine masculine, or are they not? And there's this requirement for us, the people, to bring a truma, which is the Shechina itself, us bringing this offering, this Sota offering, to show our own faithfulness, which I thought was very fascinating, transposing that the personal, jealousy and ritual around it towards this cosmic relationship and the jealousy that God has over the people, over the land, over Shechina. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and also like it's a well taken point that the land belongs to the Kadosh Baruch Hu. It's not. It does not belong to people, and it's really not to get too political about it, but that's should be constantly kept in mind. That when land claims are made, be careful who you claim owns it, especially Eretz Israel, because it's very clear from the Torah and from, I think, the Zohar, that the land belongs to Hashem first and foremost. Right. Also, this is a great valence on the idea of the God is a jealous God, which is a thing we see in Torah. Right. This gives a new image on the idea of God as being jealous.
Right. Right. Jealous of the spouse. Yeah. What's the great line of one person said the land belongs to me, the other person said the land belongs to me, and the land said you both belong to me.
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
that rots in the ground, right?
No, right. Yeah. And again, there's plenty of Sitra Achra around in that whole conversation, unfortunately.
Yeah. It's also interesting the mystery of the straying wife. And this is something which I think when we talk about mystery here, we're talking about the goodness that's veiled beneath the evil, let's say. And that's a theme which I think is emerging here. The mystery behind the straying wife is, for all that know the story of the Sota, is that when the wife is proven innocent by the sacrifice, according to the text, she's blessed with the blessing of fertility, and it's a chance for the husband and wife to repair their relationship now that this suspicion and jealousy is being cleared out. So from the evil, from the darkness, from the suspicion, there's a chance for blessing, and this seems to be perhaps also what we're saying here, the mystery of the straying wife, that from the jealousy between Kuchabricha and Shechina, between the divine masculine and feminine, there's a chance for that to be exculpated and for blessing to emerge from within the darkness. This light that comes with the darkness, which is greater than the undarkened light in some sense.
Right, and it also points to the dual reality of jealousy. Right, jealousy is actually it's a classic sort of Kabbalistic emotion. It's too much of a good thing. Like, yeah, we should always be somewhat covetous, desiring of our partner, and jealousy is just that. It's too much, right? And that's a very classic sort of Kabbalistic thing, right? Of Gevura, yeah, judgment. Being harsh, being judgmental is a thing you have to do, but there's too much of it. And it's the idea, right, that there's a core and a husk to jealousy, and even jealousy has to be redeemed, that it's not inherently evil in some way. There's a mystery there, and the mystery, of course, is the redemption of that. Again, of the Sota ritual, which is pretty gross ritual in most ways. All right, Zevi, you're there. You froze up, I think. Back. Back. All right. So I guess I'll continue.
Yeah.
All right. So Rabbi Abba said, "The blade of a sword is surely pointed at you." Right. So we come back to the war language. Then the Yanuka replied, "I'm surely strengthened by shield and buckler to protect myself from it." Again, one does wonder to what degree the weapons and armor here are doing some other symbolic work, like, because interesting, shield and buckler are repetitive. A buckler is a kind of shield. So one gets the sense that if you read this literally, you get the sense that the Yanuka doesn't have a weapon. He's holding a shield in both hands, a large one and a small one, perhaps, which is, again, humble brag, right? Like, I don't even need a weapon against you guys.
It's also interesting because it's a non-comeback. It's like, it's not a sword. It's like there's an accusation here, which is that you're saying something about Shechina here. You're comparing her to potentially the wandering wife.
Right.
Like, there's a sword at you, right? Like careful, watch yourself.
Right.
And he doesn't he doesn't really answer. He just says, like, he responds with this imagery. He's like, well, I have a shield, but like what's your shield? Like, there's an accusation that he's making by pointing the sword, right?
No, that's right. That's right. So Rabbi Abba said, right, the Holy Land has no alien authority, right, so it cannot enter there. It being Sitra Achra. So from whom do chaff and straw come, right? So again, we're asking both a literal question and a metaphysical question. This is about the existence of evil in the Holy Land. If it's a holy land, how could there be evil there? But also, right, why would there be these things there? So the Yanuka opened.
And the existence of an alien authority with whom the Shechina may have consorted with, which is not which I think is not possible in the Holy Land. Right.
That it shouldn't. That shouldn't be possible there. So the Yanuka opened, saying, "God created the human being in His image, and it's written, God said to them, be fruitful and multiply. If the serpent had not copulated with Eve," which is a very Zohar idea of what happened between the Eve and the Nachash, the serpent, is that the serpent had copulated with her. then Adam would have never generated offspring. Or if Israel had not sinned with the golden calf, they would have not generated offspring as well. So the argument here, right, is that, again, this is part of this interesting redemption arc, right, where sin becomes a kind of a necessary evil. God commanded them to be fruitful and multiply, but that wouldn't have been possible had not the serpent copulated with Eve, basically had sex with Eve, and it's from that sex enters into the world. And so the idea here is God gave them a commandment, and that had to come into existence, and therefore the sin was necessary. And ditto the sin with the golden calf, right? That when the Israelites received the Torah, they all had to purify themselves, and that they were in such an intense state of purity that had they stayed in that state of purity, they would have never had sex ever again, and that would have been the end of them. And therefore, the golden calf was the sin that they had to commit in order to be able to generate offspring again. So they're, again, the mirror imaging of the sin of Adam and the golden calf.
Yeah, it's a very interesting one. This whole notion of the necessity of sin for procreation, the lust. There's this sense that the term that's used in the Talmud in Yevamot of the zuhama, this filth or this lust that's introduced by the sin of the snake, this copulation that comes in. But as Justin's saying, it's without lust, right, which is seen as dirty, which is seen as sinful. There would be no sex, and therefore there'd be no procreation, right? There's that great line in the Talmud of when they were going through the different major sins, and they were like trying to close them off, and each one had its ramification, right? So they closed off the desire for idolatry, right? And there's a very dramatic description of this fiery beast of the temptation of idolatry, which they catch in this lead cage or lead box, and when they lose idolatry, they also lose prophecy, right? Like this whole universe is very finely tuned, and if you're going to be playing with the switches, you're going to lose something in the payoff. And if you lose idolatry, if you lose the capacity to enter into a deep existential relationship with the plastic, with the object of one's making, then you've also lost the imagination to tap into something like prophecy, and it's this very same faculty which you're closing off in some sense. And then the Talmud continues that they saw that they were successful in getting rid of idolatry, and either were or weren't aware of the ramifications yet. Then they said, okay, what's the next big sin? Is the temptation of sexuality. Let's get rid of that. Like, let's create the utopia, basically. Let's play with the dials of reality. And they shut the valve of sexuality, and then the next day there's no chickens in the market because even the animals have stopped copulating. There's no more. And then they realized that they couldn't play God, basically. They couldn't shut the dials. So the sense that also a point which comes up, Daniel Matt brings here from Bereshit Rabbah, that when God creates the world, and the verse says that God saw that it was tov me'od, it was very good. So tov, says the Medrash, is the Yetzer Tov, but tov me'od is the Yetzer Hara, is the evil inclination. Very good is the evil inclination, because without it, there would be no children. There'd be no one would be getting it on. And this is this whole thing we've been saying, that the ches and tes, the man and woman, sexuality, the sinfulness of it, the lust of it, the is part of it. We need it, or else there's no chita, or else there's no grain, there's no existence, there's no yikum.
Right. It's their it's again, it's a lovely idea that sin is not a thing to be avoided. It's a thing to be not curated is not the right word, but it's a thing. Maybe. Yeah, channeled. Right. Like and this is an idea obviously that has huge ramifications in Hasidus as well. That that you redeem it. That there's a kernel of goodness in every sin, and that you have to redeem it. But that the redemption is only possible if the sin's there. And also, God commanded them be fruitful and multiply. You'd be in a situation where you get there's a mitzvah you can't achieve. That's not fair.
Right.
And so, so again, there's this kind of like the unveiling dynamic of redemption, where we go from a state of purity to a state of sin to a state of purity to a state of sin, and always climbing up the rungs to me, in my mind, in a very Hegelian way, toward the absolute.
It's also interesting. There's also a Schopenhauerian sense here that after the act of copulation, it's the devil heard laughing. Right? It's that humans, if they were logical and calculated, they would not continue to produce offspring and bring them into this terrible world, as far as Schopenhauer sees it. But part of this terrible system is lust, and lust is what tricks us into. It's the snake, or the sin of the golden calf, which tricks us into fulfilling the commandment of multiplying. It's interesting that in a more perfect, less perfect world, however you're going to spin it, then that wouldn't happen, right? We wouldn't be perpetuating. And here the Zohar is celebrating that imperfection, which allows us to be here today, essentially, right? It brings here the line in the Zohar, the line in the Talmud of Avodah Zarah, that we have to thank our ancestors who sinned by the golden calf, or else we wouldn't be here today. Like, we can quibble from today to tomorrow, like whether it was good, whether it's bad, is it not? But we would only be able to have this discussion at all if it happened, and if it,
right.
So thank God for it in some sense.
Right. And again, it can be both good and evil at the same time. That it's all about how it resolves, and the resolution ultimately is the final redemption that occurs, at the end of time. That was part of the redemption arc.
Inshallah.
Yeah. All right. But surely, if the serpent had not copulated with Eve, Adam would have immediately generated offspring. And this is to the point earlier. Certainly, for look, a decree was issued, right? The God said, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and conquer it." And those offspring would have been pure without any filth at all. So the argument the Zohar makes here, or at least the argument that they try to come back with, is that no, God commanded Adam to be fruitful and multiply, and therefore Adam could do it, not asexually, right? There would be asexual reproduction,
right?
So surely, right, they could have done that. And similarly, the Holy Land, into which the alien authority cannot enter, produces chaff and straw, not from the other side, whereas outside of the land, the chaff and straw are of the other side, which imitates holiness as a monkey imitates human beings. It's a classic image. The Talmud loves that, the image of monkeys imitating people. Although I think we imitate monkeys more than they imitate us. My children love to do ooh, 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 and I'm like, I've never seen a monkey imitate people, but I see people imitate monkeys all the time. But yeah, I think so. There was, at least I think it's the Yanuka talking, that there was a possibility of asexual reproduction had the sin not had the sin not happened. Otherwise, God would have made a commandment that wouldn't be fulfillable. And it's interesting that this is a child talking again, right? Like, obviously, this kid's not had sex before. It's like a 5-year-old, and so again, like the Zohar is replete with sexual imagery, and it's totally sex positive, right? It's about how you do it and when you do it, and with whom you do it. But it's interesting that the child seems to have a very negative. The child in what seems to be his immaturity has a very, and you see this in kids, right? Like, sex is gross. And I think that this is maybe an instance where the Zohar is really letting the kid be a kid. It's like, ooh, gross. Like, you guys do that? Like, as opposed to, I think, the more mature position of the Zohar, which is no, sex is holy if it's done in a certain kind of way. I guess I'll finish this out and we'll start the next section, I suppose.
But what just happened here, Justin? So they question his premise, saying that no, we don't need the snake, we don't need Zuhama, we don't need impurity, we don't need lust. We could have done this sexuality thing without it.
Or we could have done the reproduction thing without it.
The reproduction thing, correct? Yeah. And then he responds and says, surely the Holy Land, into which no alien authority can enter, produces chaff and straw. What's the point here? Back and forth. That is he saying that chaff and straw exists both, just like chaff and straw exists both inside the land and outside the land, because there's this imitation that the impurity does of holiness. So too, there's two forms of the sexuality. One is of the holy form, and one is of the outside the land form, which imitates the holy form.
Yeah, I mean that has to be. Yeah, there has to be some version of the parallel between. I mean, this is again the xenophobia of the Zohar writ large, right? That the Holy Land doesn't have. It has chaff and straw, but not like,
right,
not like the non-Jews do. Which is again important because these guys are living in Spain, right? They're living in the world of chaff and straw. So so that's like an interesting part of it.
So and he's both saying our chaff and straw is not like your chaff and straw,
Right.
although they look the same, and our sexuality is not like your sexuality, although they look the same.
Right, and also like you get, again, this is a grist for the mill of the whole like underground polemics against Christianity, is that what other we here have an image of Adam being able to generate children without sex. Well, who else generated a kid without sex? Like it's basically like a humble brag, right? Like, yeah, like we could all be virgin makers of children. It's Adam mucked it up, but there wasn't anything inherently miraculous about that. Like it just happens that and also that not only right that virgin birth isn't terribly interesting because it's only that one sin that ended it, but also that it's actually not that great.
It's not the ideal.
It's not the ideal. That virgin birth is not the ideal. That birthing children through sexual reproduction is actually part of the redemption arc. That just seems like some shade too. Like again, it's not on the nose in the way that you might think, but the discounting of virgin birthing, there's no way that's an accident. Like that, immaculate conception, big whoop.
Do you think that might be the comparison they're making to the inside, the straw and chaff inside the land versus outside the land?
I mean, the distinction they're drawing there is clearly a distinction about insiders and outsiders, and so it's interesting. It would not strike me as shocking that the insider outsider distinction about Adam who could have had children without sex, which was not ideal, versus which is contrasted with people who have to reproduce through sex. I mean, it's hard not to imagine that as being a little bit shade thrown at the virgin birth.
Right. There's also another potential reading here of Adam generating offspring immediately, which is not a virginal reading, but that part of the curse that Eve receives in the fallout of the sin is that she would bear children in labor children in pain, and according to in more pain, right, as we mentioned, and that part of that includes the very notion of a 9-month pregnancy, and a very famous, very prominent Kabbalistic and then later Hasidic reading is that the initial span of pregnancy would have just been 1 day or 1 night, which then ties in very sweetly into the whole Genesis redemption arc, which is that Adam and Eve are created on the 6th day. They copulate on the night of the 6th, which is when the Kabbalists prefer copulation to take place. Friday night is the time for that zivug, the time for that union, and then the next morning she gives birth to the Messiah. Right, that's the classic. That's like the short version. Had not like the things gone wrong, that would have been the 7th day. Shabbat would have been the end of time. That child would have been the Shabbat child, which would be the Messiah, and that might also be what they mean here by the generate children immediately, which means then if that's a possibility in their framework, then and that all takes place without this impurity of lust that's introduced with the snake, meaning to say that if that narrative is a possible one, which with Kabbalists, that's a very real potential narrative that could have happened, that means that copulation could have happened in a perfect, ideal, utopian sense without anything. And the child seems to be dismissing that version, saying that what seems to be presented as the ideal utopian version of this Messiah Shabbos baby is actually not how things were supposed to go. Like there needed to be the complication of sin and lust had to be introduced into the story in some sense.
Right. Yeah, and I think that fits with the Zohar's. It's soteriology. With the Zoharic soteriology more generally.
Yeah.
And again, this is one of the things I love about the Zohar is that on the one hand, we think of mysticism as being detached from reality at some level, as being otherworldly, but the Zohar is an incredibly worldly text.
Yeah,
it's very very engaged with with just like the world, like our world, in a way that in a way that I think is striking sometimes.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
It doesn't discount this, because it has to be about this world, because it's all about the redemption of this world and how this world and the upper world parallel, and so it can't be otherworldly.
It's a rejection of the otherworldly very often, as we're seeing here.
Yep. I think that's right. So I'll wrap this part up, and then I guess we can start the next. So Rabbi Elazar and the companions came and kissed him. So this is a constant thing we see of them kissing the Yanuka when he outsmarts them. And he said to them, "It seems to me that by weapons of battle I've earned the bread on the table." Right? That I beat you. I beat you. Which again is interesting, right? Because we've just got the image of him with two shields, as opposed to with the weapons of battle that he had. That he's been pulling his punches, so to speak. And this is even further contraindicated, right? Rabbi Elazar said, "Certainly so, for all the weapons of battle are in your hand, triumphant in your hand. They came and kissed him as before." Which is, again, it's an interesting, conspicuous thing where just a moment ago he's described as being unarmed, aside from having a shield, but now he's described as being not only unarmed, but having all the weapons.
There's also an interesting inversion here, which is that we read earlier that he's the host. They've come to his table, and he said, "You won't eat my bread until you've shown me your weapons." And now it's him saying, "It seems to me that by the weapons of battle, I've earned the bread on the table." It was his bread. He didn't need to own it.
It's true. Yeah, you're right.
It's I don't know. It seems to me almost, and I'm curious to know what you think of that. It seems to me almost like he got so excited in the Divrei Torah, in this whole like pilpul, and this whole pilpul daraisa, and this whole like battle of Torah, that he like forgot even like who was who at the table, who's host and who's guest, and he's just come victorious out of this glorious battle, and he's maybe a little hungry, and he's like, "Oh, by these weapons, I've earned the bread on the table." It's like that's how it's appearing to me.
I like that.
He's forgotten himself in the dance.
That makes that. Again, also it kind of reveals his like kidness, like being a child, right? That's the kind of thing kids do, right? They get so into, my kids get so into something they like don't want to eat,
right?
Or they don't know that they had to be reminded to go use the bathroom or whatever. So it's he's so enthusiastic that he's forgot himself.
Right, and here we see the inversion where before they said, Rabbi Elazar said to him when they opened, he said, "We are the skilled warriors, and you're just a young child." And now he's saying, "Certainly so, all the weapons of battle in your hand, triumphant in your hand." That he's returned his insult into a compliment here.
For sure, and again, like your comment last time that they're goading him into battle, is all the more compelling.
I'm wondering if we've reached a natural break here, close to hour and a half, because I don't.
Yeah, this next section kind of goes on for a while, and again, I apologize to folks. I had to step out for a few minutes. Because then we get into all the tendrils and the Enoch Metatron stuff, which is like weird and fascinating.
We had fun while you were going, Justin. You don't need to apologize too much.
I'm glad you took the helm. Maybe this is a good natural breaking place, and then we'll come back next week, and we'll pick up with the tendrils. Which is interesting. This next section is all about wine, and it's always interesting hearing a 5-year-old talk about wine as if he's a sommelier. And I'm
Right.
like, it's just funny again, like what the child, this imagery of sex and battle and wine. These are all
Yes.
very like these are all interesting topics for a child to be taking up.
Yeah.
Which again, it shows he's a strange child.
Yeah. Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
Well, I guess we'll stop here, folks, and we'll pick back up next Thursday with more of the Yanuka and Zevi. You have an episode. You have a video coming out here in a minute.
Yeah. Once I'm done, I'll publish on the Kabbalistic journey of the Hebrew alphabet. A friend of mine who's a very wonderful scribe and dear friend. He draws out the entire alphabet from Aleph to Tav, and walks us through part of the Kabbalistic story of them, which very much tied into what we've been discussing here. And I'm very glad I got a chance to produce that, and I hope people enjoy it.
Yeah, folks, go check out Zevi's channel. Check out his episode as it drops, and I'll see folks tomorrow for some Cathar. Stuff. Getting into the book of the two principles. Speaking of evil, the Cathars and the Kabbalists share this, of course, in common, that they're very committed to the existence of evil. So it'll be hopefully folks will find it interesting. But until then, or until next week, tune back in for more Zohar while I go get my furnace fixed. So see folks soon.